Hello, this is Alva. Welcome to the Noble Wolf podcast. Today, joining me is Michael. How are you doing today, Michael?
I'm doing fantastically, Alva. How about you?
I'm doing good. I'm excited about this topic as today we're talking about trusting yourself.
Me too. It is a fascinating topic. And before we dive into the very depths of this subject matter, I'm going to discuss what it actually is that we're talking about and define what it means to trust yourself in the sense that people from the counterculture like us and like many people you might have heard are probably using the term, that is. Because many people will have heard someone say, trust yourself, somebody perhaps from a different background politically or philosophically, and they won't really know what it means. Like, what does it mean to actually trust yourself? It's like you're not like a separate person. And so we're going to get into the depths of what this is referring to. And it all begins with our childhood. When we start out life, we are bombarded from every angle throughout our childhood and adolescence and all the way up into our late adulthood, in fact, with information and opinions and statements from various different authority figures and entities, whether it be religion or political leaders, so-called leaders, or academic science, especially the social sciences, whether it be even philosophy, different philosophers for the more intellectual classes of people, school teachers, priests, public figures, people that we listen to, pop stars, so many individuals. We just get bombarded continuously, and we end up with a worldview that has grown out of our surroundings, out of what we've been exposed to. Now, this isn't necessarily a negative thing, because of course people are naturally followers for the most part. Most people are not meant biologically to construct an entire worldview from the ground up with pure logic and experience and then say that this is like true and this is my worldview and it's so incredible. Most people are basically meant to grow up and they'll have a society, at least traditionally, that has an appropriate view for humanity, more or less. It didn't always work out that way, but this is what we're intended to have in general. However, we have deviated so far from what is appropriate for humanity that we don't have any such leader. And so anyone with even a shred of intelligence and intellect and virtue has to say to themselves, even despite my life, my various different trials and tribulations, how small I may feel, I need to in some way take on a leadership role because at least I am thinking. Most people are total followers. At least no matter what failings I have, I'm actually thinking and want to know the truth, want to make things better, and so I am going to construct a new worldview that's going to make sense and is going to make the world better, because our world has, of course, become rather negative and detrimental and benevolent in the human sphere of interaction, because we have terrible leaders in high up in our hierarchies, and we follow them essentially down over off the edge of the earth. And in order to free humanity, free nature, improve the world, we have to undo this. And this is the point of creating a new worldview, and this is what it means to trust oneself. This is what it means to say that I am going to believe in myself. It means that you, the person listening, are going to create a way of viewing the world that you would defend against anyone and actually be able to come out as the winner philosophically, intellectually. I'm going to create, this is what you're going to say, if you want to do this, I'm going to create a worldview that is good enough that it can stand up before anything, and this is a worldview that is going to be true. It's going to be truer than most people's worldviews, and it's going to be a servant. It's going to be something that benefits me. It's not going to be something that's been created to sell me a bunch of garbage or to program me or make me into a slave. You're going to say it's going to be something that will free me. And this is so powerful. That's the kind of worldview that in the past, in long distant ages before man was domesticated and enslaved, that his leaders passed on to everyone around them, man's shamanic teachers and great uplifting figures. We don't have that anymore, like I said, for the most part, so we're going to do it ourselves, despite the fact that it seems scary and uninviting many times. So in order to properly begin to create a new worldview in which we can trust, a worldview that comes from ourself, that we can believe in and think is correct, first we have to deprogram our minds. And what does this actually mean? How do we do it? Essentially, deprogramming our minds in this context means to take everything that we believe, everything that we think is true, that is not necessary for a coherent worldview, and put it into the category of unknown, unproven, testable. We can figure out if this makes sense. We can figure out if we need it. Many things might be true, but they're not necessary to understand anything, and so we can cast them aside. Now, we have to be very careful because, of course, we can't do this with everything that we think. For instance, you wouldn't want to throw out logic or question logic. We might want to look at different types of logic, but broadly speaking, we wouldn't want to question the entire field of logic and different logical systems and say that we should just blindly, randomly pick different things that might be true. We don't want to question that we exist. We don't want to question I think therefore I am, because that's too fundamental to really be necessary. We don't want to question intuition because we wouldn't be able to operate properly without having some intuitive contextualization for what we're doing. Mathematics wouldn't even work properly without intuition. Mathematics is actually very intuitively based, surprisingly to many people who are not good at it and don't know it. And we can't throw out mathematics either on that topic because it's very necessary, especially if you're a scientist or an engineer or just want to brew a big batch of beer. You need to know mathematics, maybe just intuitively, but you need to know it in some way. So many things are kept and reserved even if you tear down your worldview. But a lot of what we think, a lot of things like religion, like large sections of science, like politics, the state, different acquaintances we might have, all these things go into the category of I don't know, I'm not sure. And then we attempt to figure out what is true. And the act of throwing most of what we think into the category of I don't know is deprogramming your mind. And it can be a very emotionally disturbing and sort of terrifying experience. And this is the reason that people who take larger than average dosages of psychedelics probably freak out, because when you take enough of an ego solvent, I guess you could call it, something that dissolves your ego, with your ego also goes a lot of your preconceptions. In fact, all of your preconceptions of the process is powerful enough, and people end up in their experiential selves being shocked because it's just like, I'm like just this little being in this world, and everything that I thought doesn't even really matter necessarily. It might all be made up. That's terrifying for most people. That's, again, why I think people freak out on drugs a lot of times when they take a lot. And this means that even if we're not using a psychedelic in the process, that we want to proceed with delicacy and caution. But if we wish to move forward, then we also have to do so with strength and diligence and really try to get rid of a lot of what we believe and not hold on to it as necessarily true, and then attempt to take a look at it.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to religion, it can be really, really difficult because basically anything that questions the religion you've been brought up in usually is said to be like false doctrine, or like kind of evil. And so even if you even begin dipping your toes and thinking, is this that I've been told really true, like it really, like in your mind you are conditioned to be afraid of even beginning to think that, because then you'll fall into darkness, for example, like well, depending on whatever religion you would have been raised with. But and basically you're kind of scared, like you said, to question it. And it is scary. And I think it's also natural for people to kind of build up their views as themselves. So for example, if they believe in socialism, for example, then that they make that a part of them emotionally, and it almost feels like a limb of their body. So if you question that ideology, it's like you're questioning them. You take it, or they, it could be you, it could be them, take it personally, instead of taking it as kind of objectively and looking at it as like separate from yourself. You look at it as a part of yourself. And I think that's where it has to start. You have to start with trying to separate the beliefs you hold from your value and your true, like, personhood or essence, whatever you want to call it. And that, when we've been ingrained in this culture to have them be the same, it's really hard to let go of that. And that's where entheogens can help, if done, safely and with a lot of caution and study. But it can also just help. One method that works is to dare yourself to question your beliefs the same way you can question other people's beliefs. For example, it's really easy for us in the States to look at female genital mutilation as something that can be harmful, right? But it's harder for a person who grew up in that culture to look at it that way. For them, it's easier to see why they do it. Maybe they, because they've been, programmed to think they need to do it, and it's a good thing. And same thing in America. For a lot of people, if you bring up circumcision, for example, people freak out because that's ingrained in them emotionally, as you're not supposed to question that. And a lot of times, the more emotional the ideas are, the harder they are to get rid of. And usually the more really emotional they are, it's very likely that the more not real or not true they are. Because if they were true, they wouldn't need to have this deep emotional attachment to them in most cases. So that's a good thing. Like if someone questions something you believe and you start feeling really emotional about it, that can be a good trigger for you to be like, oh, why is it that I'm feeling so emotional about this? Why, if what I'm holding is true, then why does it matter to me that that person is questioning it, right?
That's definitely the case. I often think, when imagining people struggling to let go of ideas that are not true, which they kind of know are not true at an intellectual level, I imagine this transhumanist image of somebody like sawing off their arm to put on a robotic arm that's like way better than their own arm. It's kind of an amusing image, but that is what it seems to feel like for many people. Not that I'm really a transhumanist, but that's what it appears to be like for many people. That it is like this really painful process where they're kind of having to replace their natural, so-called, it's not really natural, but they're sort of condition their state of being a part of them with this artificial thing that's like a piece of technology that somebody uses to understand the world. It's like my ideologies are like a piece of technology. I can use them to manipulate things and to get things that I want. They're not something that I feel like I've got to hold on to and got to say that it's the ultimate truth and nothing will ever be true, and other than that, it's more like that if something better comes along, then it's like an upgrade. It's like a new galaxy or something, as in the phone. Obviously, it's like, oh, great, a new version. It's not something where I feel like my existence and being depend upon this thing because I have a sensation of self and of the world that goes beyond a model that I've constructed. And many people make the model into themselves and make it into the world, and this makes it extremely challenging for them to separate themselves from it. It's as if a person's intelligence, their self, their consciousness is like a computer in a way, at least the substrate of it. And there can be many different myriads of shining programs on it of so many colors. But at the end of the day, underneath all those colors glistening and shimmering before us, there's a computer, there's mechanical hardware underneath it that is the essence of what the computer is. And that doesn't go away because various programs get placed upon the computer. That remains indomitable and eternal underneath the very fabric of the programs that are placed upon it. So now that we've talked about how to deprogram your mind, and it's not so much of a how, in fact, because there's no particular way to do it that is right for everyone. So many people in the New Age say that about everything, and I'm not in the New Age, but this is a case where it is genuinely true. You have to essentially just do it. You have to figure out a way to separate yourself from most of what you think is true, except for basically logic, math, self-existence, and intuition. And there are a lot of different ways that can actually look materially and experientially. But now that we have that at least defined and you have a path forward as to how this might be done, now we're going to examine how we can actually take what has been thrown away, what has been seen to be not necessarily true, what has been put into the category of needs to be tested. How can we take all that stuff and bring it back and say that some of it is true? Because if we don't believe that much of anything except logic and math and all these like very abstract disciplines and intuition, if we don't believe in that much, then how is it that we are going to be able to make any rational decisions? How can we do anything if we don't have any particular beliefs? How are we going to be able to make decisions, to be able to do things if we don't have anything solid in which to really ground our actions? So we're going to have to put things back into our category of the truth. And how are we going to do that? Well, the first step is with consistency. We have a need for consistency. So the need for consistency is what we're going to be discussing, and it is essentially the need for an argument to be presented in a way in which the conclusion follows from the premises. So you can have an argument that has all true premises that are empirical and you know they're true, you believe in them, all this stuff, but the conclusion might just not follow. So, for example, you could say Socrates was Greek. Greek is a language, therefore Socrates is a language, and that would be invalid. It's committed an informal logical fallacy, the argument that I've made, but the premises are all true. Everybody pretty much would accept that they're true, and yet the conclusion is not actually valid because there have been errors in the formulation of the argument. Another example could be just throwing a bunch of stuff together, and this would be something like what a lot of leftists do, like racism, sexism, homophobia, all this stuff. They just throw it together, and then they say, therefore, we need a new law or tax or something. And none of those things even really are that well tied together historically and logically, but they just throw them together with so much emotion, And at this point, there's not even a logical fallacy. It's kind of not even wrong. And so we need to look at everything that we think and say, is it a coherent process of getting from the fundamental assumptions that we make and the fundamental experiences that we have all the way to the conclusion, the shining golden brightness at the end of the tunnel that we want to reach out and grasp in our hands as a basis for action. One of the steps that one can use for the process of judging logical consistency is to go over a list of formal and informal logical fallacies. This is not the show to go over them because most people find them somewhat boring, and there are many of them, but there are plenty of resources online, even books entirely devoted to the subject, and so you can examine informal and formal logical fallacies. You can examine what an argument consists of, what it needs in order to be valid, and how a statement or a fact differs from an argument. One important thing to point out quickly is that a lot of people have a supposed argument that is only contains one premise and a conclusion, and almost inevitably this is an example of somebody who doesn't know about arguments, because basically what they're doing, what this person is doing, is stating something as the truth and then bringing the truth back in the conclusion. And this is not going to be helpful, obviously. Now, there are circular arguments that are valid. In fact, every circular argument is valid in a way if the premises are true. The problem with things like this is that they end up generally not being used for the purpose that you would use them for normally or naturally. So an equation that is valid is a circular argument, but you use it to be able to find out more things about the variables and about what you're working with in the equation, depending on what it is. And the reason I brought up this specific problematic, I know that's like a Marxist word, but this specific very disturbing logical trend is that so much of what people believe is based upon things that are at least ostensibly true, but that have elements of this one premise argument in them. And you go again and again and again, and basically what you could say is that if an argument is, it looks like a mathematical equation, and it's not really showing you anything more about the subject, then it probably isn't too valid. So that's just something to think about, I suppose.
Yeah, and in the end, it's important to remember that this is your life that you're living, and it's not your mom's life, it's not your dad's life, it's not your kid's life, your friend's life, your school teacher's life, or your bishop's life. It's your life, and you are the only one responsible for ensuring that you live according to your dreams, I guess you could say, or your like inner guidance. And I think a lot of us, the reason we struggle with trusting ourselves is because we're basically taught to not trust ourselves, and maybe we've trusted ourselves once and failed, and we're scared to try again. A lot of it stems from fear too, fear of being wrong, fear of looking like a fool or a clown, or being silly. But that's something that we all need to work on getting over, and asking ourselves why we do certain things. Like, why are you staying in a friendship if a friend is treating you like crap? Is it because you want to, or because of obligation? And same with family, or other things that you have taken on your plate. And a lot of times with family, you might have like a love there, and so it makes it worth it to go through the hard times. but you also need to ask yourself why you're doing things. Is it because you genuinely care, or is it because you feel obligated to, and that society would look at you a certain way if you didn't do something or did something, and kind of always kind of ask yourself when making a decision why you're doing it. And of course, like, people's input can be very helpful. I think input from, nature and plants and that is oftentimes more helpful than people. But in the end, while it can be beneficial to hear others, especially if they've gone through similar things when making decisions, in the end, you have to dare to listen to yourself and go your own way and decide that your individuality matters. You matter. You are someone worthy of living the life you want, and that is okay, and just go on from there.
Very elegantly stated. And all that relates back to logic in a way, because our sense of logic, our sense of A equals A, really according to the more ancient philosophers that have lived, is a part of our essence, that we can understand that because it's been imprinted upon us from some Platonic realm or from various different spiritual worlds, that this understanding of abstraction is a part of our very core being. And so when the world asks us to go against that and to accept something that we know doesn't make sense, that we know feels, and not in an emotional sense necessarily, but we can sense that there's something wrong with it. This is the same type of sensation that is spread throughout moral wrongs, philosophical, logical untruths, mathematical untruths. It's that pinching sort of unpleasant sensation where you can just tell that that something is off. And we've developed this over millions of years of evolution, and it's critical that we hang on to it. And in fact, I remember earlier today that you brought up an excellent example of the way that people can use logic improperly and have an argument with true premises that leads to a really weird conclusion. So we're going to play a clip from this. So here it goes.
There are ways of telling whether she is a witch. What do you do with witches? And what do you burn apart from witches?
More witches!
Wood! So, why do witches burn?
Because they're made of wood.
Good! So, how do we tell whether she is made of wood?
Build a bridge out of her.
Ah, but can you not also make bridges out of stone?
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Does a wood sink in water?
No,
No, it floats! It floats! What also floats in water?
A duck.
Exactly. So, logically,
If she weighs the same as a duck, she's made of wood.
So we kind of see now why we need logical consistency, why it's important, why it's necessary, and why it ought to be, in a lot of ways, the foundation of our process of figuring out what it is that we once believed that was actually true. However, there is another point, a very important aspect to figuring out a valid worldview. And this secondary point is telling sense from nonsense. Now, what in the world would that really refer to? Well, the thing is that much of what people believe is non-experiential, meaning that it's either something that an atheist might believe that is really abstract or really expensive to figure out, something involving big bangs and black holes and dark matter and things that people are not going to be able to ever generally experience because they're so expensive to deal with. And obviously they probably don't exist, but on that side we have those things that only governments will ever have access to. On the other side of things, we have religions like Islam, where it's so long ago, it's so far back, it's so in the mists of time and space and eternity that I'm not really that long compared to how long we've been here according to the best scientific estimates, but it's so far away, we're not going to be able to know what Muhammad was really like. We're not going to be able to experience what he experienced even if he were alive today. And he could, for all we know, just be kind of a disturbed person who was hearing things that were some kind of evil demon or something. Who knows? But this is unempirical. A lot of pop science is unempirical. It's not something that is literally sensible. And the premises for our arguments should generally be based upon either other good arguments or upon something that is sensible, that's experiential to us. Because if it's not experiential, if it's not something that we can actually ever interact with, then we shouldn't take it to be true. Now, you can have things where several studies are done, and it is what is being studied is, say, a plant that has been used in a certain way, and the studies back it up, and you look at their funding, and they weren't funded in a really outrageous way, and you can see why the chemical in the plant would work, and that has enough element of experience in it that you could say, yeah, that's probably true, that's helpful, but you never ever want to go just on basically hearsay. You want to have either a very diverse section of knowledge that concords with itself in a way that would be hard to imagine without some kind of truth, or you want to have something that is very experiential or personal, or something that is just plain necessary, obviously, like you have to assume that you exist, and so forth.
Okay, so what about people who then say, well, they have had a witness from, I don't know, Allah or the Christian God or whatever, and they say like they just had this great feeling and spiritual experience, so therefore they know whatever Muhammad said or whatever it may be said is accurate. What would you say to that?
That is an excellent question, and actually everyone has got to know. Carl Sagan once said that people who say that don't know what they're talking about, but it really is a good question in this case. So that question epitomizes the importance of genuinely experiencing data. So somebody might have seen any number of things. So let's imagine that some angel or some entity or Allah came and said, well, Muhammad is the prophet and you have to worship him. Okay, so you say, that's what it said. That's pretty miraculous. Now, it so happens that people hallucinate sound. They think they hear sound that isn't ostensibly there, that they could themselves do an experiment. They could run a tape recorder and it wouldn't record it. And this could be for various different reasons, but let's just cast aside materialism and atheism and just say we're going to assume that some of the time at least people hear legitimate whisperings from some other worldly world. Well, how on earth can you say that if there is another world and it is a spiritual world and it communicates with us sometimes, that this world is ruled over by Allah? There is nothing that says that that is true. If you experience that, then you experienced it. You should take it that you did experience it.
Experience itself can definitely be real, but that doesn't mean that the meaning you draw from it is real.
Yes, exactly. If that happened to me, I would say that an evil spirit an evil mountain jinn had come down and was trying to trick me. And if somebody else experienced it, they would say something else. So that's applying an assumption that Islam might be valid, that you kind of assume maybe it's valid, I heard it's valid. How does that make sense? That'd be like saying some person told me something and so it's true. If there's a spiritual world, then it's the same as this world. You'd have to have a long discussion with a person and figure out a relationship with them and really delve into it and test their ideas to see if it's true. Just because something's spiritual and it might be legitimately from another realm does not mean that it is valid, or that beings are not selfish from that world and don't want to trick people. It's ridiculous. And then the other thing that we have to get into is, of course, that everybody has these experiences. So obviously all the gods can't exist in the most strict form that people imagine them, because that would be inconsistent. So we've got to imagine that some of them are not real, or not real in that way. And this gets us back to basically just saying, well, I heard a voice and there's a powerful sort of consciousness or a state of mind surrounding this supposed being, and so I guess the paranormal is real. That's all you can draw from it. You can't draw anything else. It's very imaginable that evil spirits could be tricking people all the time if they are real.
Yeah, it's kind of like, have you ever seen The Wizard of Oz? Yeah, like the experience for Dorothy and them was very real of this wizard, but it turns out it was an illusion. And and that's important to be remember that not everything, well, not everything that you experience, like the first conclusions you draw don't necessarily have to be true. Like for example, the religion I grew up in, basically you were told if you felt good about what you heard, then that meant that it was true. And so that really puts you into like a weird way of kind of being able to determine whether something is accurate or not.
Definitely. That is a very unfortunate worldview that a lot of people who have grown up religious get foisted upon them, essentially.
Yeah, or like if you don't feel good about it, it's bad and like stay away. Like so that we have to kind of separate that. That's not what we mean with trusting yourself. It's just if it feels good and or if it feels bad. When we say trust yourself, we mean like trust yourself to get to the root of things, and that you are able to do that, and that you can take on the world basically and call bullshit on this stuff.
Definitely. Epically said. So, in conclusion to the topic of telling sense from nonsense, we basically want to act like scientists. We want to figure out what an objective measurement of various different types is in nature, in reality. We don't want to depend on external forces and external entities and lies and superstition and hearsay and all this stuff. We want repeatable, testable, experiential data. And even logic is really experiential, because it's just the experience of running logical processes that are then tested experientially in the physical world. And this is just so critical. It's very important that we proceed in this manner, so to speak. And essentially, this is the sense-based aspect of our bringing back of various different aspects that were in our original worldview. So, for instance, it might be that the Muslim God doesn't exist. That was in your old worldview, but it might also be that cabbage is nutritious, and that might have been in your old worldview as well. And differentiating the two requires both consistency in logic and empiricism and sense and sensibility. So, to finish out, we're going to quickly talk about constructing a new worldview. And this is the most difficult aspect of the entire process, because this involves creativity. It's not about recombining, it's not about working with things that have already existed, it's not about any of that stuff, although that might be an element to it. The core root of creating a new worldview is to step forward into an experiential reality, step forward into new domains of experience. We could think of an inventor trying out new experiments, for instance, or a writer imagining a totally new world, or a theoretician thinking of a completely new equation. Of course, that's all influenced by the past. It's all partially dependent on other people's creations and other things, but I definitely think and feel strongly that there's a spark of creation from nothing, so to speak, or creation from the essence of the person creating that is present in this process. There's an element that can't be reduced to all the circumstances surrounding it, and that kind of gets to the root of why I'm not a determinist, of course, because I think there's something in a person which actually generates these things. And the way that this is going to work for any one person is going to differ, because we can't generally have an enormous ideology. Even if we might be a great leader or something, we can't necessarily have an ideology that encompasses every last field of knowledge. For example, we might have a general ideology about the way politics should work, or a general ideology about our own life, but this is going to vary, because we might be a farmer and apply most of the way that we think to farming. We could be an organic farmer, biodynamic, or pesticide-laden Monsanto shill, but whatever the case may be, we are going to carry over a lot of the practical implications of our way of viewing the world into that profession. Similarly, we might decide that we're going to be a technician. We're going to carry over a lot of our worldview into that, and it will be shaped by it. And the worldview is going to come, in large part, in a lot of ways, out of what seems to be the most true and important aspect of what is true that we put back into our true box. So we might put back into the true box that anarchy is good and that we should get rid of the government. And then we might, like some YouTube philosophers, devote our whole life to promoting anarchy and saying that we should remove the state. And the reason that this is what a lot of such a person's worldview is constructed in relation to is because that was what was the most important thing to them. It's not just that the worldview is correct, it's not just that it is valid or useful, it's also that it is a part of the person who creates it in a legitimate way, that it's shaped and molded and formed by them, and that it is something that they have the excitement and intrigue and interest and fascination with, to get behind it and drive forward with it, to conquer the greatest mountains, to seize the stars in their hands. And this is the creation of a new Veltan Shahoon.
I definitely agree with a lot of what you say, Michael, and I think it's important to strike a balance between trusting yourself and your view, and also kind of living in the world with the other dreamers and people. Well, I guess they're kind of the same thing, what I was trying to say. And kind of finding a balance there to kind of find a sense of being able to accomplish as much as possible, while also not creating unnecessary drama.
Excellently said. And this is also critical to the creation of a new worldview. So somebody is not probably going to, for instance, reshape a new language or reshape maybe their profession completely into a new, unheard of profession. A lot of these changes will come in the general framework of humanity, but just altering the way that we experience and exist in it. So again, pesticide farming might become organic farming. That doesn't mean that we're going to be like altering mankind so that we can obtain energy from the sun through our skin at any time in the near future. You probably get the idea.
Yeah, basically what it is kind of distancing ourselves from the outer influence of culture and beliefs, and kind of living in it, but separating yourself from it so that you can take a step back. And for example, if someone says something really mean to you, then you can remember, hey, like, the person is saying this based on them and their story that they're telling themselves in the head. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be something I take to heart or personally. Like, I can of course listen to it, but that I take that separation, understanding that everything that comes from someone else doesn't have to be true.
I think that we often get faced with so many statements and opinions that are negative, and not that that's a bad thing if we are saying something stupid, but a lot of times we get faced with negative opinions of us for simply stating what we think, and oftentimes people say these negative things because they have no arguments to present, and they're just lashing out at us for really foolish sorts of reasons, and it is an unfortunate a series of events that takes place. However, if we remain strong in our attempt to find a new way of viewing the world, eventually they're not going to be able to continue on. Either they'll leave us, or they'll actually start thinking about what we say, thinking about what we're saying to them, thinking about what our stances and opinions are, and they will actually become a follower of ours, because of course not everybody, again, is a leader, and the kind of person who would insult everybody and yell at them many times, not always, but a lot of times, if they're very belligerent, might make a great follower, because they'd be very loyal and stay to the correct fixed ideology that is actually true.
Yeah, a lot of times, like if you start questioning something that maybe, let's say, for example, if you thought all elephants were dangerous or something. This is like a hypothetical statement, and your friend thought that as well, and then you started noticing, hey, that elephant really didn't come in and trample the village. It was calm, and you start like noticing these things and start questioning your previous held belief that all elephants are really dangerous. Then that can really scare the friend, because it starts triggering them to question too, and it creates a cognitive dissonance in them. So you might, in the beginning of the process, if you've gone through it, if you like changed your worldview before, or if you're starting to now, you might notice that it scares people around you because they're used to you thinking and believing a certain way, and it scares them to see you change, because it's change is scary, and it triggers them to question things as well, and that's really scary. So that might create tension, you know?
Definitely. And also, as I said, that can create a sense of almost prestige, not in a bad way, but it can create a sense of power, like, yeah, my friend, he was really smart, like, he figured this out, he didn't just buy everything, like, wow, we should really listen to him. It can create a good sense of, yeah, that guy was right in a later amount of time. Many times it will end badly, of course, unfortunately, but oftentimes people, or at least some of the time, people will come back and say, you're right, like, let me help you with this, and that's always excellent. So, we've covered all the larger areas of importance in relationship to creating your own worldview, your own new ideology, and thereby gaining trust in yourself as a living being, as the creator of your own destiny. And to finish up with, I guess all that we can say is that there were more topics that could have been covered. We could have talked about the need to return to nature. We could have talked about different kinds of fallacies, different kinds of logical fallacies in more depth. We could have talked about how empiricism works and the basis of empiricism. There are many areas we could have delved into, but at the root of it, what we talked about were what we felt are the most critical key issues that need to be drawn out, the most important aspects of the creation of a new worldview that must be cultivated and must be selected in our mind and focused upon in order to really formulate a stance that is valid and enduring and helpful and virtuous and beautiful, the kind of stance that will create a better world. And I really appreciate you all joining me and Alva for this magnificent journey through the world of trusting yourself and on down the rabbit hole to infinity.
Yeah, let's not forget to have fun.
Indeed, the world would be a dark and miserable, worthless place without fun. So, goodbye everyone. Auf Wiedersehen.
Thanks for listening, and please let us know, like message us or let us know what your thoughts are or what maybe you would like for us to talk about in an upcoming podcast. Again, thank you for listening and have a great rest of your day.
And don't forget to rate this podcast and like us on Facebook.